All right, anytime you're dealing with a rational number that can be made by multiplying the same number twice, we call that a perfect square because it means you're taking the same number, positive or negative, so we say integer, and we can multiply it by itself, and that'll give us this square root or square. So a perfect square has two identical integer factors. That's basically what I just said. And for each perfect square, there's actually two square roots. One's positive and one's negative. And the reason we say that one's negative is because negative 2 times negative 2 is going to give us positive 2 or positive 4, because a negative times a negative is a positive. And we also know that 2 times 2 is 4. So the square root of 4 could technically be positive 2 or negative 2. And to show that it's positive 2 or negative 2, we use the plus minus symbol. And it looks like this. And we say that it can be positive or negative 2. Or positive or negative, whatever. Now, in the calculator, it will only ever give you the principal square root, which happens to be the positive one. And that's kind of the assumption that it always wants, but it's just good to know that you can be positive or you can be negative. And we use the principal square root, and a square root kind of looks like a division sign with a little hook on the end. If we're solving an equation or expression, or if we're solving an expression with it, we put it where it's a grouping symbol. It's called the radical, and so it's one of the first things that we deal with in there because it follows the G for GEMDAS. And you actually can't do a negative square root of any number because when you multiply a negative times a negative, that gives you a positive. So there's no number you can multiply twice and get a negative. So there are no square roots of a negative number. Now you'll notice that here we have a list of squares and square roots. First couple on each is done for you. So for the perfect squares, we have 1 squared or negative 1 squared. That's going to end up being 1, because 1 times 1 is 1, and so is negative 1 times negative 1 gives you positive 1. And for 2 squared or negative 2 squared, we get 4, because 2 times 2 is 4, and negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. And 3 squared or negative 3 squared would be 9. 4 squared or negative 4 squared would be 16. 5 squared or negative 5 squared would be 25. 6 squared or negative 6 squared is 36. 7 squared or negative 7 squared is 49. 8 squared or negative 8 squared is 64. 9 squared or negative 9 squared is 81. 10 squared or negative 10 squared is 100. 11 squared or negative 11 squared is 121. 12 squared or negative 12 squared is 144. 13 squared or negative 13 squared is 169. 14 squared or negative 14 squared is 196. 15 squared or negative 15 squared is 225. 16 squared times 16 squared, or negative 16 squared times negative 16 squared. So 16 times 16, sorry, I misspoke. 16 times 16, which is 16 squared, or negative 16 squared, is going to be 256. 17 squared, or negative 17 squared, is 289. 18 squared, or negative 18 squared, is 324. 19 squared or negative 19 squared is 361. 20 squared or negative 20 squared is 400. Now, the expectation is that you will have, you're going to have 1 through 15 memorized. Okay, so if you can get those memorized, it will make things a lot easier on you, just as a point of reference. Now, when we come over to the other side is going to have us going backwards. So what it's asking is, what is the square root? And now notice it's got that little plus minus sign out to the side because that indicates it can be the positive version or the negative version. So starting us off, the square root of 1 is positive or negative 1. The square root of 4 is positive or negative 2. The square root of 9 is positive or negative 3. The square root of 16 is positive or negative 4. Square root of 25 is positive or negative 5. Square root of 36 is positive or negative 6. Square root of 49 is positive or negative 7. Square root of 64 is positive or negative 8. Square root of 81 is positive or negative 9. Square root of 100 is positive or negative 10. Square root of 121 is positive or negative 11. And again, we are getting these numbers because what we know we can do is we can say that 11 times 11, or negative 11 times negative 11. In each case, that's equal to a positive 121. So that's why we say it can be positive or it can be negative. Square root of 144 is positive or negative 12. Square root of 169 is positive or negative 13. Square root of 196 is positive or negative 14. Square root of 225 is positive or negative 15. Square root of 256 is positive or negative 16. Square root of 289 is positive or negative 17. Square root of 324 is positive or negative 18. Square root of 361 is positive or negative 19. And the square root of 400 is positive or negative 20.